Welcome to the bottom line. I am your host, Mihran Kalaydjian. Today, we are joined by State Senate candidate Jake Levine to discuss the future of California's 32nd district and the issues that matters most to the Valley residents. Let's get to the bottom line. My first question is, what motivated you to run for Congress, and what is District 32 ready for new leadership now?
What motivated me initially was the experience of uh, standing side by side with my neighbors and my community in the aftermath of the LA fires. I lost my childhood home, one of thousands, of course, that were lost. One of a couple in my family. In addition to my mom's home, we lost my aunt and uncle's home. I started a nonprofit. I got together with community, with the SNAP Foundation, with the California Community Foundation. We built something called the Department of Angels that is helping survivors to organize and provide resources towards the recovery. And I found that the leadership of our incumbent and of our elected leaders in government was inadequate, was absent, and was not strategic. And to this day, more than a year later, we remain more or less without a plan. And the community has been left to fill gaps on its own. And it was an honor for me to have the chance to play a small role in that with Department of Angels, but I felt I could do so much more from Congress. I found that all across California's 32nd district, my family's story was not unique, which is to say that so many people are confronting failures in government leadership, whether they're struggling to afford to buy a home, to pay for childcare, to pay for an education or groceries or healthcare, whether they are part of our treasured immigrant community that powers our economy forward and are now confronting an authoritarian regime in Washington, whether they are young people struggling to find a job in a depressed economy. So many people are facing public institutions that no longer support those communities. And so I decided that we could do better. And it's just been an honor to be able to put myself forward and compete for this really important position in government.
Now, I would like to go to our cost of living and housing. Housing affordability and homelessness remain urgent challenges in the Valley. What concrete Congress actions would you support to improve affordability while protecting neighborhood stability?
Well, there's so much that we could be doing. But just to put this in perspective, because you rightly indicated just how poorly things have been going for the last many years and decades. The average age of a first-time homebuyer in this country in 1960 was 23 years old. Today, it's older than 40 years old. Housing has cost 57% more in California than the national average, and 74% of renters have considered leaving LA entirely due to the high rents. And I can tell you, in my own family, I have cousins who recently left Van Nuys to go to Northern California where life was more affordable. We need to tackle this problem fundamentally on the supply side, which is why I am proposing a national housing development bank that will catalyze construction of new affordable units and help drive down costs of supply. I think there are other really creative things we can be doing on the supply side to reduce costs in terms of using prefabricated materials, modular designs, and strategies for localizing some of that production so that we can bring the cost per square foot back down into this universe. Right now, it's $1,000, $1,200 a square foot in the stratosphere. We also need to help renters, Miran, because so many people are priced out of even buying a home right now. So we're pushing for a federal renters tax credit so that renters can have the same benefits as homeowners who are able to do a deduction on their mortgage. I think that there's a whole host of ways that this can dovetail with wildfire resilience and climate resilience and can really lead to new jobs, good paying union jobs in the home construction business. And I'm really looking forward to helping to spur the production and creation of new units and fundamentally focused on driving down that supply side set of costs.
Public safety, it's very important. Residents rank public safety among their top concerns. How will you balance criminal justice reform with accountability and community safety?
Well, first of all, it's really unacceptable to be living in Los Angeles today with so many people feeling so unsafe. And this is an issue that spans age, it spans every demographic. Almost everybody that I speak to on the campaign trail is concerned about public safety. We need to be doing more to demand more resources for public safety. That includes more fire safety resources in the way that we've been advocating. It includes appropriately funding LAPD so that they can be responsive to the kind of crime that we're seeing on the rise. And it also requires, and this is so important, and I will circle back to what you said about anti-Semitism because that is also so important. But as a general matter, we need to be prioritizing strategies to address the root causes of crime in this city. And I think that's sort of twofold. Number one, we have to provide adequate resources for mental health care. In addition to what we're seeing about the loss of capacity in our healthcare system in general, and maybe we'll touch on that and some of the things that we're focused on to bring down the cost of healthcare and expand services. But there's a crisis in LA around mental health care. If you try to get a bed at UCLA Hospital, or at other hospitals in the city that had previously been leading on this issue, some of those programs are now shuttered. We need to refund those programs because they have outsized benefits on public safety downstream. And we also need to address recidivism. We need to incorporate diversion strategies so that as people are entering the criminal justice system, they're not staying in the criminal justice system, but they're being diverted to critical resources, not only in mental health care, but in job training, in social services, in family services that show actually that they really are meaningful, productive strategies in anti-recidivism. So I think it's a mix of ensuring the adequate resources, but also getting at the root causes. Now, on anti-Semitism, and my heart goes out to the Jewish community in this regard. I'm Jewish. We're raising my son Wilder as a young Jewish boy, and I worry about the world that he is entering with so many recent incidents of anti-Semitism in the Valley in particular. And that's why we're focused on taking some of the great ideas that were published in the last presidential administration under the National Security Strategy to combat anti-Semitism and working to codify some of those ideas that need to be legislated in order to actually be implemented. Some of that is around funding, some of it is around criminalizing certain hate crimes, some of it is around security measures, and I'm looking forward to working on that in office.
Jack, my next question is related to economy and the small business. California's cost of living continues to rise. What legislative steps will you take to make life more affordable and support small businesses?
Well, those are sort of two separate questions, but let me focus on the small business aspect of it, and we can return to some of the other really important and I would say inextricably linked affordability issues, because you rightly indicate that one of the main pressures on small businesses is the high cost of living. We see that across so many industries. But I really got my start professionally after law school in a small business. I went to go to a startup, a tech company called OPower. We grew from startup to IPO at the height there were 750 or maybe more employees. We ultimately were acquired. And it was a business that created jobs, it created opportunity, it created innovative ideas to help fundamentally people save money on their electric bills. And what I learned in that experience, and what we know is borne out in the data, is that the vast majority of new job creation in this country is is thanks to small businesses. And the vast majority of companies that exist, in fact, the overwhelming majority, I think close to 95%, are themselves small businesses. And yet today, it is too difficult in our district for small businesses to access capital that they need to invest in growth, in hiring, in capital expenditures. And it is too difficult for those businesses to hire because the talent pipelines have not been tended to by our public institutions. So we're focused on a couple of things. Number one, we really want to reinvigorate the CDFI network, the Community Development Financial Institution infrastructure that provides low cost and flexible lending to small businesses that are unable to compete for lending in the private markets. These enable businesses that are immigrant owned, veteran owned, women owned businesses to access critical funding that they can afford in terms of the cost of capital and to reinvest in their businesses. We also want to direct the SBA to increase SBA 7A and micro loan access because, again, so many of these businesses are looking for financial products and capital that are not available from the private markets. And we need to build pipelines into the workforce. This is not only about supporting our unions who have apprenticeship programs and opportunities for young people to train, but it's about creating new institutional frameworks for that. That's why we're working on fighting for a national service corps that would be modeled after the state level service corps that I built, the California Climate Action Corps, training young people in new trades, in new technologies, in the enormous opportunities of the clean energy revolution. There's a whole host of other things. One of the things that maybe we'll talk about, but I just want to touch on here because it's so critical for the small business ecosystem is transit. In this district, we have been starved for resources and innovation and growth of our public transportation options. And even though we think of LA as a car culture, and it is, and we're proud of our cars, there are so many people, working people, who rely on public transit. And it has been 40 years, for example, since the idea for the Sepulveda Transit Corridor was first conceived. Now it has a draft environmental impact report done. That's pathetic. We need to accelerate these projects. We need to invest in them. We need to create more opportunities for people to live close to where they work and to reach those destinations with public transit. And I think all of those things dovetail together to support the small business ecosystem.
My other question, traffic congestion and mobility remain major frustrations for Valley commuters. What state and Congress transportation priorities would you fight for?
Well, first of all, we need to properly invest in and actually build the infrastructure that I mentioned just a moment ago. The Sepulveda Transit Corridor is a great example of this, a project that in the span of its 40 years of ideation and debate, we've seen China construct untold thousands of miles of new high-speed rail, subway systems, airports. This country has got to remember how to build again. And part of that, and this is also relevant to the small business conversation, I failed to mention it in that context. But so often I think that with the best intentions, we end up over-regulating as Democrats so many of our key sectors. In the small business sector, there are all kinds of ways that we can reduce permitting fees, that we can speed up the process for a restaurant or a yogurt shop, or a retail store to get permitted as a business. Also in the film and television industry, which is a whole other subject. But similarly, in terms of our infrastructure projects, these projects have to go through years and years of both national, federal environmental permitting, state level, local. We need to speed that up. We need to streamline it. We need to treat this like the emergency that it is for anybody that's traveled across the 6 miles from the west side to the valley on the 405 freeway. You know that it's an emergency, and there are alternatives that we could be investing in and speeding up. I think that in addition to that, we need to build on some of the good work that the state and city have been doing by supporting transit-oriented development. When we talk about new housing opportunities, when we talk about new commercial and retail opportunities, to make those friendly to public transit and to put a thumb on the scale from the federal government with financing and incentives to be able to do that better.
Access to mental health and crisis services remains inadequate. What reforms would you support to expand treatment and response capacity?
Well, I think we need to fund early intervention programs to ensure that we're catching, a lot of when you meet people who are recently unhoused, or even people who've been unhoused for a long time, so often the story is a series of incremental steps. And if you can catch somebody before they um, fall into unhoused situation and provide the support early, we know that that pays dividends in terms of not only preventing homelessness for that particular person, but preventing the costs that will then be borne by the community in addressing that homelessness. We need to ensure that everyone has access to mental health services, and by to do that, we have to grow our mental health workforce, invest in education and training to do that. And I think that there are some really innovative things that some municipalities within the LA County jurisdiction and adjacent have been doing. I think about the work of Redondo Beach, for example, which has instituted a new kind of court to take up homeless related infractions. And this court, in addition to providing services in the criminal justice system, it actually attaches the kinds of mental health and social services that you would think of as early prevention and wraparound services to lead to better outcomes in terms of repeat homelessness. And although it's a small ecosystem, they've had tremendous success in terms of reducing their unhoused population. And I think we can learn a lot from cities like Redondo Beach that have been experimenting. And as a federal leader, what I would seek to do is to convene those leaders who have had success stories and to allow for that kind of spread of intelligence and information and best practices so that we could make sure that the city of LA is benefiting from the experience of the city of Redondo Beach.
Water is a major issue. California faces long-term water and infrastructure challenges. What investments are necessary to ensure reliability and resilience?
I think that what we've been doing so far, just to take a very hyper district specific example, what we've been doing so far, and this started with the work of Tony Bielenson, who was a member of Congress um, that represented the San Fernando Valley for many years in the creation of the Sepulveda Basin and the way in which that asset, what we talk about in the climate space as a natural asset, because it's in fact a watershed and it's become a resource for water recapture, for the kinds of ecosystem services that can be provided in terms of cleaning and providing ultimately water for services around the city. That's a model that we need to build on. We need to get more federal dollars to continue working on reclamation and wastewater recycling, to continue working and keeping the U.S. Army Corps ahead of the curve on its management of that property, and to spread that example across the Sepulveda, not just the Sepulveda Basin, but the whole valley, where you're looking at an LA River ecosystem that has been chronically underinvested. We now have bright spots in that ecosystem, but they're not in our congressional district, where you have in Atwater Village, for example, the creation of a bike path and investment in vegetation and habitat restoration that has had benefits for water resilience and reclamation in that area. We should be connecting that part of the LA River to the valley so that there's one contiguous pathway that is friendly, not only for the environment, but for local businesses, coffee shops and restaurants and schools that can be a part of that, runners and pedestrians and cyclists who can enjoy that. And I think that that all can come together. Now, I think just mention one other thing because the challenges that we're facing on this issue are only going to get worse with climate change. We are seeing dramatic swings in terms of variability in weather, where we have many years of record drought in a row, followed by many years of record rains. And managing that requires new infrastructure. It requires strategies not only for water conservation during the drought years, but for water saving and storage during the heavy rainfall years, and for the kinds of repairs to our roads and our streets and our highways that that requires. And so we should be thinking about mechanisms for how we're funding that, how we're planning that, how we're strategically working with other states in the West, states like Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico that are dealing with dwindling water supplies in the Colorado River. So there also has to be a lot of coordination, not only among counties in California, but among states in the West to manage the new normal that we're now living in.
How can the Congress and the state improve public education and better prepare students for good paying careers?
Well, Miran, I'm so happy that you raised this. It's very important to me too. And I think, as you know, this district is very much a tale of two cities.
Hmm.
While the median income is nearly six figures, so many people still can't afford to buy a home, to go to college, to pay off their loans. Enrollment in K through 12 is now down. It's been down across LAUSD, but it's further dwindled as a result of ICE raids and the aftermath of what we saw with COVID-19. Um, so we're dealing with the aftermath of these massive shocks to the education system, but the funding gaps in education have not followed. And people might be shocked to find out if you were to look at the public schools in our district, in Canoga Park, in Reseda, in Chatsworth, in Northridge, the percentage of students living under the poverty line, people who are in low income families and as a result qualifying for Title I funding in within the LAUSD system, it's staggering. It's 70, 80, 90%. And so, number one is we need to quickly increase the Title I funding to close some of the achievement gaps. We need to reform funding formulas so that LAUSD can receive more equitable allocations. But I also think we need some new ideas. We need some fresh ideas. Something that I'm talking about is bringing the tech companies in to actually help fund some of these gaps because we know that our kids have been exposed to a really addictive technology in the shape of social media. I think what's coming now in terms of artificial intelligence is a major unknown, but it is something that's already starting to be a part of daily life for students in school who have access to ChatGPT and Anthropic. And as we watched these technologies wreak havoc on our politics in the last 5, 10 years, I think people thought, okay, maybe we'll figure it out. We're starting now to see these technologies also create real challenges in terms of anxiety and mental health, attention span for our kids. And I think that we need to start thinking seriously about how to enable equitable strategies for requiring those technology companies to actually fill the gaps in education that they have been exacerbating through their technologies. that's something that I'm eager to work on with younger members of Congress who I know are tracking this because, like me, so many of them have young kids who are in elementary school and who are seeing this play out on a daily basis. And I think it's something new that we can start talking about now to build some support around.
You mentioned a lot about environment and energy costs, which is a very critical issue. They didn't pay that too much attention. How should California pursue climate goals while keeping energy and utility costs affordable?
This is the one of the most untapped opportunities we have in the state and across the country. And that is to say, by unleashing the power of the clean energy economy, of wind, of solar, of battery storage, this is the cheapest, most abundant, most affordable form of energy on the planet. There's a reason why, Miran, in the last few years, even with the headwinds that the Trump administration has created, that when the private sector goes to purchase new electricity, it is predominantly purchasing clean energy. Over 90% of new installations in the United States are wind and solar. And that's because it's affordable. So what we need to do is to continue California's leadership, but frankly, to not rest on our laurels. We need to expand it. We need to create national models for how we are deploying this cheap, abundant electricity across the country, because that is the only way we will bring down costs. And as we are now confronting what, for the first time since really the 1970s, represents an increase in demand for electricity on the US grid, and that's because of all of the demand from the artificial intelligence industry and the data centers that they're building. We have got to make sure that as those assets come online, that they are powered by clean energy, not by fossil fuels, not by gas, which we're already seeing many of these companies investing in, and that they are paying their fair share of the infrastructure required to interconnect those resources onto the grid, which is a public good. So I'm worried that we're actually missing an opportunity right now. We're seeing so many data centers. First of all, we're seeing communities saying no to data centers because they're so concerned about they're reasonably concerned about the impacts on electricity prices, on water availability, and we need to make sure that those communities' voices are heard. But secondly, when those data centers are being connected, we're seeing them as their own islands, disconnected from the grid, which should not be permitted because that undermines the ability of the public good that is the national grid to be strengthened, to be made more resilient, to be made more affordable for people. So I think there's a huge opportunity, but right now it's not being managed appropriately. And we need leaders in Congress who understand how this works, who have experience in it, and who can chart a pathway forward towards more affordability and more abundance.
Many voters feel disconnected from Sacramento and Washington, D.C. How will you ensure transparency and accountability to your constituents?
Well, I think they feel disconnected from Washington. I also think people feel disconnected from each other and from their communities. I think this is a crisis that we're living through, also as a result of the amount of time that folks are spending online, in digital spaces. And really, the thesis of my campaign, Miran, is that community is a muscle, and you can let it atrophy or you can flex it and make it stronger. And what we're seeing now across this country, in places like Minneapolis, in the Valley, where I show up to a Home Depot on Fridays with community to stand up against ICE and CBP, in Chicago, is a flexing of those muscles, but that's been disconnected from our members of Congress. So we are going to propose an office that doesn't just provide constituent services, but also provides a framework for bringing people into democracy, for organizing people as a kind of a democracy core so that they can get civically engaged in their communities, so that they can understand, what the opportunities are to join a neighborhood council on a cleanup, or to join folks in the Palisades on a reconstruction effort, or to join our immigrant community in mutual aid and mutual defense. I think that's a crucial part of what's been missing in Washington, and it's something that we're really excited to be investing in this campaign and to carry that over into office.
What would be your first priority if elected?
First priority is addressing the staggering cost of housing. And that means getting together with colleagues, not just in the California delegation, but all over the country, to start hammering out the kind of legislation that we talked about before to bring prices down and to make housing and really the American dream more affordable and more real for so many Americans. There are, I will say, because I have a 1A, 1B point of a note on this question, which is to say that we still need the resources that we have not gotten for the recovery of the fire survivors in the Palisades. And every single day I will be fighting to continue refining and defining what that support looks like around infrastructure, undergrounding the power lines, supporting the work to do that, not only in the Palisades, but everywhere that it should be done for fire safety across this district, ensuring that people who lost their rental units have rental assistance and housing assistance, ensuring that the environmental services that should have been provided a year ago, like soil testing and air quality monitoring, are provided. That's a huge priority. And by the way, there's so many issues like this in the district that have gone unattended at Aliso Canyon in Porter Ranch, at Santa Susana in Simi Valley. And those will be top priorities to finally remedy with new leadership.
My last question would be, why should voters trust you to represent this district at this critical moment?
We are in an extraordinary time, and we are unfortunately led by elected officials who have been in office for so long that they've forgotten what really matters at home. I'm a son of California's 32nd district. I grew up here. I went to school in the Valley. I know this place like the back of my hand. I think I've played baseball on nearly every baseball diamond in the Valley. And I also have the experience to get things done in Congress. I've helped pass the country's leading climate and environmental justice legislation when I worked for Fran Pavley in Sacramento. I built a company. I helped build a company from early stage to startup. From early stage to IPO. I helped grow a federal agency and built my own program in there from 450 million to $4 billion a year by being rigorous, by holding our team to account, by making sure we had goals and metrics for success. I helped launch the California Climate Action Courts, put 20,000 young people to work during the pandemic doing climate resilience across the state of California. I know how to get things done. The stakes are too high to keep the same folks who have gotten us into this mess in Washington. It's time for a change. It's time for a refresh of our leadership. And I would be honored to have the opportunity to represent this district in Washington.
Mr. Levine, thank you for sharing your vision and priorities for California's 32nd district. And thanks to our viewers for staying informed and engaged in the decisions shaping our communities. I am Mihran Kalaydjian. This is the Bottom Line Show. Stay informed, stay involved, and we will see you next time.